Personal responsibility is such a big topic nowadays. I'm Gila Ross, host of the Power Up podcast, where we share short, inspirational ideas that upgrade our everyday lives. And in this episode, together with the Wednesday night discussion group, we're going to take a look at developing a wholesome and not debilitating sense of personal responsibility.
Now, let me ask you the question. When I say the word responsibility, what comes to mind?
A mental state.
A mental state. Just tell me the first
being
thing.
A parent.
Being a parent, yes. That is definitely just a little bit of responsibility.
Taking charge of everything.
Sorry, I missed that, Adele.
Taking charge of things to make sure they run.
Yes, taking things.
Ownership.
Anyone else wants to add anything else? Like, do you feel like yes, responsibility, or no, I just want to run away from responsibility?
I think it depends what it is.
Growing up, that's responsible. So you're responsible, aren't you? Because you're growing up.
Yes, adulting, right? That is part of adulting is being responsible. I think really there's almost like two ends of the spectrum when it comes to responsibility. On the one hand, if you think about back when we were looking for someone to marry, or if you think about who we want our kids to marry, right? Fast forward a little bit of years, and we want them to marry someone responsible, right? Because responsibility is a good thing. But on the other hand, sometimes responsibility can be like a little bit like it can be stressful, it can be heavy, right? It can also be like a bit guilt inducing, right? I'll share with you a little story. So a lot of you know that a week and a half ago we ran the Seed crowdfunding campaign, and then a week later my children's primary school, they ran a crowdfunding campaign as well, and they asked all the families. Didn't ask, they kind of more or less insisted that every single family take a page and do their bit to try and raise the funds, because they're moving into a new school, so they needed money for that. And so because they were so close together, I was like comparing the experience of it, and like I found that the second week, it was, even though like I felt like a little bit responsible to do my part, it was so much less stressful than the Seed one. And I realized why, because I didn't have that sense of responsibility, right? Like I felt a little bit responsible, but it wasn't my responsibility, right? If I didn't make my target, okay, I tried my best, but I didn't do it. So I think that's kind of like the two ends of the spectrum. On the one hand, that responsibility can be a good thing, right? And sometimes we can even like search for responsibility, right? Like if you want to have a say in how things are happening, then sometimes you have to take on responsibility. But sometimes we're not interested in responsibility. It's like, whatever, I don't want to know, or sometimes the responsibility that I think Rachel mentioned about responsibility of raising children, right? Being a parent. Definitely tiny little bit of a responsibility. And often it can bring up, it can make us feel guilty, right? Like we feel like responsible to give our kids like whatever it is that we want, trying to give them a happy childhood, or a relaxed parent, whatever it is. And when we mess up, either when it's not our fault, right? Like sometimes our kid has a kid in their class that's mean to them and we can't fix it, or anything that we can't necessarily fix that our child has, we could feel guilty, or even if it's when our fault, right? Like we snap at our kids, we do what, who knows what, and then afterwards we feel guilty. So the question I want to throw out today and I want to look at is, yes, responsibility is definitely a commitment. And I want to look at how do we develop a wholesome sense of responsibility, the kind of responsibility that we want to see in others, but at the same time not fall into the trap of a responsibility that induces guilt, that is almost like debilitating. Any thoughts on how we develop that sort of sense of responsibility, like something that's wholesome, healthy, and not debilitating? Let's start with trying to define what responsibility is. Now, what's fascinating about it is that if we look at the Hebrew word, Hebrew language is a fascinating language. Why? On many levels. One of the reasons is because the words themselves have meaning, right? If you think about the word responsibility in English, it doesn't really tell us anything about what responsibility is. Whereas the word in Hebrew for responsibility is achrayot. Now, achrayot actually has two different meanings, and I think when we look at them, we're going to learn something about responsibility. So the first meaning that it can mean is it comes from the word acher, which means after. Now, what is it telling us? It's telling us that achrayot means understanding that every action that we take right now, there is an after to it, right? There is a consequence to our action. So if I decide to stay up late tonight watching Netflix, for example, there will be an after to that action, which probably will be that when I wake up tomorrow morning, I'm going to be tired, right? It's a simple idea, but it's a very, very, it sounds simple, like, of course, everything has an after, but I think we don't often, when we're living in the day-to-day, we don't often stop and think and say to ourselves, 1 minute, what's going to happen next, right? If I choose X, what's going to happen next? If I choose Y, what's going to happen next? And it's interesting, actually, because in Pirkei Avot, they ask the question, who is wise, right? Who's a wise person? Now, if you would ask me that question, I would say, who's wise? I don't know, someone who has a PhD, someone who's been to university, someone who's read a lot of books, right? Who is wise? But what does Pirkei Avot say? Pirkei Avot says someone who sees the future. Now, we're not talking about someone who's clairvoyant, right? Who knows what's going to happen next, but it's someone who stops and thinks what's going to happen next, right? Now, if we were to operate that way, right? So let's say it's late at night and I'm a little bit tired, or I'm a lot tired, as most of us on this call already are, right? So and I'm tempted to spend the time chilling on Netflix or chilling on social media. If I were to stop and think to myself, hold on a second, what will be the after of this consequence? I might choose differently, right? In that case, I might choose to say, you know what, I'm actually going to shut down whatever Netflix or social media, whatever it is, and go to sleep so that tomorrow I'll be well rested. Now, again, so that was a small example, but I think it shows that even though in our mind, intellectually, we know obviously that every action that we take has a consequence, we don't often slow down, stop and think, hold on a second, what will be the after of the action that I'm going to do? So what responsibility means is taking the responsibility for whatever the consequence of our actions is going to be. And this is on two levels. On the level number one, it's in this world, right? If I choose to do this now, what's going to be the consequence on it? But also we know that we are a soul, right? We are a soul living in a body. and that soul lives on for eternity. So the action that I take today is not going to only impact going to impact my after, my tomorrow, but it's also going to impact my soul for eternity. So real achrayut, real responsibility means, hold on a second, I'm going to first think, what is going to be the consequence of this action that I take today, right? If I choose to, come to if I'm tired and I choose to push myself and come to a class, right? How is that going to impact my tomorrow? How is that going to impact my soul? How is the inspiration that I take from that is going to impact my soul, both in this world and in the next world, which is really for eternity? But I would have to say that there's a kind of disclaimer for this, a caveat for that, which is that because when you look at it like that, right, and we look at it that it's not just for right now, but it's also for my tomorrow, and for the future, but also for eternity, it can feel like, wow, that's an awesome responsibility. So I have to put it in perspective. Rabbi Dessler talks about what's something that's called an nekudat habachira, which means a point of free will. Now, we're only responsible for those things that are within that point of free will. Let me give you an example that will help you understand what I'm talking about. Most of us, I'm going to go out on a wild assumption here, okay? Most of us, when we're out walking and we see a sweet old lady walking down the road, most of us do not have the urge to go and mug that sweet old lady. Am I right? Yes? No? Going on a wild assumption? I'm going to go with it anyway, right? Anyone that does, welcome to stay on afterwards. We can talk later, right? But most of us don't have it, which means that when we walk down the street and we walk past an old lady and we don't mug that old lady, we're not going to be rewarded, right? We're not going to get that many brownie points for it, because it's not something that we're struggling with. On the flip side of it is that, most of us are not on the level where we are so conscious of how precious our life is that we hold ourselves accountable for how we spend every single moment of our life, right? Most of us are not on that level. So when we sit and we chill, or we waste time or whatever, again, it's not something that we're held to the same. We lose the benefit of using our time wisely, but we're not sort of held responsible for making that negative choice, because it's not something that we're struggling with. So what are we held responsible for? We're held responsible for those moral choices where we struggle, right? So for example, again, and I know there are people are on different levels and wherever you are in your Jewish journey, so I'm just going to throw out a few different examples, right? If someone is trying to be a little bit more kosher, and they're out and they have a choice between going and buying a kosher sandwich or a non-kosher sandwich, and it's a struggle for them, because on the one hand the non-kosher sandwich is a little bit more tempting, but on the other hand the kosher sandwich is something that they spiritually want to bring into their life, right? That's a challenge that they're held responsible for, and the choice that they make there, if they then go and choose that kosher sandwich, then not only do they have the spiritual benefits of eating the kosher sandwich, because as a side point, that spiritual benefit of doing the mitzvah never goes away, but on top of that, they also get the benefit of flexing their spiritual muscles, right? And the reward that comes from that, and the benefit of becoming a spiritually stronger person, because they have struggled with that, and they have won that. The parallel of that is, imagine if you go into a gym, right, and you pick up weights, right, or you do a workout, right? For the benefit of the workout is it makes you stronger, right? So what we're talking about here is in that area where we struggle with our moral choices, when we win, we become stronger. And that's what we are responsible for. We're responsible for those moral choices that we struggle with, right? That we think about, that we say, I don't know, should I do X, Y, Z, right? You know, this week it's coming up to Shabbat. Should I do something extra for Shabbat, right? Should I not? You know, it's been a hard week. It's been a long week. All I'd like to do is just kick my feet up and forget about it. But if it's something that we're thinking about, then that's a moral choice that's within our responsibility. And when we win that, not only do we get the spiritual benefit of doing the mitzvah, but we also we become spiritually stronger for that. And the after, right, that the Acharit talks about is the benefit from that after is with us in both this world and the next world. So that's the first level of Acharit, of responsibility, is understanding that there is an after to the action that we are about to do, and preferably it's taking responsibility for the after, but preferably taking responsibility beforehand and letting that inform what choice we make. But there's a second meaning for that word as well for Acharit, which means acher, which means other. And that is understanding how the choices that we make and the actions that we do, how they affect other people. And what's fascinating about this, we see this in Jewish history, is a lot of our leaders, how did they start? You'd think, you know, they went to like some fancy school or they went to some yeshiva for many, many years. That's not how most of our leaders started. If you think about Moses, what was he? He was a shepherd. And what was the moment when he became the leader of the Jewish people? It's a fascinating story. What happens is we're told that he was watching his sheep, and one of the sheep ran away, and he followed the sheep, and he picked up the sheep, and he followed the sheep, and he saw that the sheep went to take a drink, and he picked up the sheep, and he was like, "Oh, you poor sheep. You must have been so thirsty. Come, let me carry you back to it." And that was the moment where God said to him, you know, you are going to be the leader of the Jewish people. Let me ask you the question. What was so life-changing about that moment? What did it show about Moses? I mean, it's a sheep, for goodness sakes, right? It's a sheep. Like, what was that moment that got that what happened in that moment? What did that moment show that Moses was able to, that was the moment that Moses became the leader of the Jewish people? Any idea?
Is compassion, like compassionate?
Exactly. It showed
Empathy.
his compassion for others, right? David was exactly the same. He was a shepherd, right? And the story shows about how he went to the trouble of making sure that all the sheep were looked after. And why did they start as shepherds? Because that's the quality that was needed, that compassion, that care for the other. And that is the other part of the Acharit, is understanding that our actions have an effect on others, right? And there's an interesting story that's told. There was a person that once wanted to convert to Judaism, and he came to Shammai, who was the rabbi at that time, and he said to him, he had a strange request. He said to him, "Rabbi, I'd like to convert to Judaism while I'm standing on one foot." And Shammai laughed him out the door. He says, "What do you mean? You know, how long can a person stand on one foot? A minute, 2 minutes?" He's like, "That's ridiculous. Imagine you go to a professor of physics and say, 'Teach me everything you know about physics while I'm standing on one foot.' It's laughable." So he said, "Forget about it." So then the potential convert went to Hillel, who was the other rabbi at the time, and he said to him, "Teach me everything. I'd like to convert to Judaism, but teach me everything about Judaism while I'm standing on one foot." So Hillel actually said to him, "You want to learn everything?" He says, "Anything that's hateful to you, do not do to others. The rest is all commentary. Go and learn." right? Now, what's fascinating is the story. The story is often, there's a lot of levels of the story that we could go into, but I wanted to pick out one point, because what the question that this brings up is, okay, great. So if you want to say that everything in the Torah is about whatever's hateful to other people, don't do to you. So that teaches us about all the mitzvot between us and other people. But there's a whole category of Jewish law that are between us and God. How does that fit into what Hillel is telling him? How does it fit into it? So the answer to that is that God is also an other, right? Obviously, God is our creator, right? It's a completely different level. But what Hillel was telling us is, just like when we tell someone what we want them to respect us. So too, what Hillel was telling him, whatever's hateful for you, you would hate it if you told someone to do something and the other person didn't do it. So too, learn the Torah, learn what God wants from you, and respect that. So that's the second level of what, the second understanding of what responsibility means. It's understanding what the Hebrew words for responsibility teaches us, is that it's taking responsibility for two things: for what happens, for the consequences of our actions, and for how our actions affect other, right? Both people and our creator. And preferably, the best way to really take the responsibility for this is to think about it before we do it, so that can inform the choices that we make. Okay, so now we have a little bit of a better understanding of what responsibility is. But let me ask you a question. A lot of times we know, right? We know what we should be doing. We know that give a simple example, right? We know that we should be cleaning up the kitchen, and yet we'd rather sit on the couch and do that. Or we know that we should, I don't know, whatever it is, you can fill in your own example there, right? We know what we should be doing, how we should be taking responsibility. What resistances do we meet when it comes to taking responsibility?
Other people's attitudes towards what you'd want to take responsibility for.
That's a really, really great point. Do you want to clarify it a little bit, Adele?
Well, I think if you take responsibility and of the situation, if you have people working with you, it will be easier than if someone opposes what you want to do. So working together as a team would probably be better. Responsibility will be taken easier than having someone to resist you, and you having that extra hassle of someone going against what you want to do.
Yeah, and I think Adele, I think this is something often that comes up a lot, right? When on a few levels, right? Like, let's say a lot of times in our Jewish journey, right? We want to do something a little bit more, whether it's do a little bit more Shabbat, or whether it's do a little bit more kosher, or whatever it is that we want to do a little bit more. And there's a couple of resistances to that. Is number one, what we perceive others will think of us, right? Like, what we, if my friends or my family find out that I'm going to do that, they're going to think, what, you're holier than me, or like, why are you doing that? And sometimes it's not just our perception, but sometimes it's what they tell us, right? It's sometimes, whether it's people within our household that turn around to us and say, we're not interested in this at all, like, just stop. Or whether it's friends or whatever, that's just saying, like, come on, like, what are you doing there? So I think you raised a really, really good point, that there's the resistance, number one, of what we perceive others' perceptions will be, and there's also the resistance that come from other people's comments to us about when we're taking responsibility in any area in our life, any other things that can cause resistance to living a life of responsibility.
I think willpower, because if you don't got the willpower to do something, then and take the responsibility to be able to do it, then people are gonna why will people follow your lead if you've not got the willpower to carry on doing whatever it is you're doing?
Yep, our willpower. And I would just say, like, to dig a little bit deeper, is because oftentimes, like, our willpower starts, sometimes it doesn't start, but sometimes it starts strong, but then it kind of like dissipates. And let's try and dig deep, and let's try and figure out, like, what causes our willpower, because it's a great point what you're bringing up. What causes our willpower to sort of disintegrate?
You watch what other people are doing.
Yeah,
Especially when you've got a different, for me personally, when you've got a different group of friends and some are doing one thing and some are doing another, you sort of want to go in both directions, but you sort of stay in the middle and you sort of drift to one side or another.
Yep. It's very, very, very hard to live in two worlds. And I'm going to dig a little bit deeper as well, because when we see what other people do, what makes our willpower, like, as you're saying, you know, especially if your friends are not doing what you're doing, right? And why does that cause our willpower to disappear? And I'm trying to get at something, so I'm not just having a go at you.
You have to believe in, like, how Moses felt passionate about the sheep. I almost think you have to believe in your own thoughts. So if you have a positive thought, then not to be easily swayed by negativity or a particular person or group of people that kind of change your mind when it was actually a good thought, like it was a good start. Because sometimes I can be swayed by other people's opinions, good, bad, and indifferent, and you have to be selective of what's good and what isn't so good.
Yep. And again, I'm going to also just dig a little bit deeper. What causes us to sway? Like, when someone, like, you know, if you have something that you want to do, you're gung-ho about doing it, and then, you know, you'll do whatever, it's a little bit of time has passed, and you see others that aren't doing it, or you hear comments from others, what causes self-doubt? And I would also, you know, I oftentimes, and I think sometimes what happens is we look at what we are trying to achieve, or we look at what the other people are doing that we're not doing, right? And we think, oh my goodness, if I continue along this path, I'm going to live a life of deprivation, right? You know, like, if I'll give you an example, right? If, let's say, I'm thinking to myself, and this is just the first example that came to my head. If, let's say, I'm thinking to myself, you know, I want to do more Shabbat, whether that means I want to keep the whole Friday night, whether that means I want to extend it a little bit into Shabbat day, whatever it means for whatever you're on your journey. What we think of is, when our willpower is strong, we think about, wow, that's going to be so beautiful. We're going to have the no phones, and we're going to have, you know, that time together with whoever it is, and it's going to be the beautiful meal and the fresh challah, and it's just going to be beautiful. And we're so like, yes, I want to hold on to that. But then what happens is, either we have comments from others, or we see other people and we think, hold on a second, you know what? They are going to the beach on Saturday. I can't do that. And if I do that, then I'm going to lose that whole thing. And we get so focused on what we're going to lose, that we forget what we want, what we're going to gain, which was the motivation for us, right? So instead of thinking, hold on a second, right? Instead of operating from a place of rational thought, where we think to myself, you know what, you're right? If I keep the whole Shabbat, and I'm just going to go with this example because we started, if I keep the whole Shabbat, yes, I'm going to lose a day where I'm not going to go to the beach and I'm not going to be able to go on trips. But hold on a second, what do I get instead of it, right? I get this experience, right, that I cannot get any other way, this special experience where it is that beautiful, beautiful day, and it's going to change the life of my family for forever, because my kids, you know, if that's what my kids are growing up with, it's going to be a different type. It's going to be a different type of home, right? what happens is that, and I think this is what chips away at our willpower, is that we get to the point where we forget what it was that was driving us and motivating us. And instead we just think, oh my goodness, if I take on more responsibility, it's going to mean a heavy life, a life of being deprived, a life of whatever. What we don't realize is that if we take on that responsibility, yes, I may, give up a little bit now, but the reason why I'm doing that is because it's worth it, right? Because I want that thing in my life. I mean, anyone here who can think back to planning your wedding, right? Was there any moment where you had, for anyone that has that did plan a wedding or plan other big a big event like that, was there any moment where you felt stressed about one of the details of the planning? And if you're not saying yes, you didn't plan a wedding, right? We all did, right? We stressed.
I didn't get stressed when planning my wedding.
All right, I'll take your words for it, Rachel.
Well, I didn't. So there you go. I must be just me.
Yes, just you. Whether it's, we stress about, is the wedding photographer going to be good, or whether we stress about, the seating plan, whether we stress about the color scheme or whatever. There's something, I think, for most of us, I'm going to say it as it is, Rachel, for every single person in the entire world, except for Rachel, right? For most of us, we stress about something, right? And you look back at it afterwards. Does it really make a difference to your long-term happiness? No, at the time, it was you, right? And I think someone was saying is before you have your first baby, people spend so much time trying to pick out the right buggy, the right pram, right? And like the color, whatever, it's important, right? You get a lot of use out of it, but it shrinks in proportion. And I think that's part of what the responsibility part of it is teaching us. It's teaching us that think about the consequence about it, right? Some things we don't give enough importance to, right? They are, right? I saw a beautiful thing that's going around, because you probably all heard about the tragedy that happened in Meron, where 45 people were killed on last Thursday. And one of the parents of the people that was killed, was told at the shiva when they were mourning for their child, that they were told, your son was outstanding in his class. And the mother said, really? So why didn't I hear about it until now? And the point is, like, so often we think about telling someone something nice and we don't get around to it. And we don't get around to it, but it's something small, but it can make such a big difference. If you think about when someone tells you something nice, whether it's about you, whether it's about someone you love, it makes you feel amazing. So what responsibility is teaching us is teaching us that think about the consequence of what's going to happen. Ideally, think about it beforehand, so that can inform your decision, right? So that we take appropriate responsibility for the big things, or for the things that are meaningful, and we remember, right, that why we're doing things, right? We remember that I'm sticking with this, and I'm not going to let it chip at my willpower, even though people around me are doing different, because it's worth it, right? And when we do that, when we take that sort of responsibility, it helps us rise above our smaller self that's only interested in like the moment-to-moment gratification, and it helps us to see the bigger picture of what we really, really want to accomplish in our life, for ourselves and for our soul, which is here on a journey for eternity. And that's what responsibility really gives us. Is it gives us that ability to rise above our small self and to see our big picture, and to go for achieving our soul's goals.
Thank you for taking your time to listen. If you got anything out of this podcast, please share it and like, rate, or review to hear future episodes. Thank you for your time and have a wonderful day.